Çok sevgili dostlar, hepinize merhaba. Maden Sempozyumumuzun 4. oturumu uluslararası bir oturum olacak. Bütün yurt dışından katılan sevgili konuklarımız, sevgili Jessica, Can ve Rachmi, hoş geldiniz Maden Sempozyumumuza. Sizlerle birlikte olmak çok keyifli bizim için. Bu 2023'ün 17-20 Ekim'i arasında Endonezya'da uluslararası bir maden sempozyumu oldu. Madencilik ve ekstraktif ekonomi üzerine başlıklı bir sempozyumdu. İkinci küresel tematik sosyal forum idi. Çok sayıda ülkeden 200'ün üzerinde katılımcı vardı bu sempozyumda. Şu anda aramızda olan sevgili katılımcılarımızla bu sempozyumda tanıştık ve ilişkilendik. Ve şu anda Türkiye'de yaptığımız bu sempozyuma onların katkılarının olmasından son derece keyifli ve mutluyuz. İlk sunumumuzu Jessica ile başlatacağız. Sevgili Jessica ile yine Endonezya'da tanışmıştık. Çok böyle genç, çok tatlı bir arkadaşımız diyeyim. Sevgili Jessica, Princeton Üniversitesi'nde High Çevre Enstitüsü'nde doktora sonrası araştırmacı ve disiplinler arası Çevresel Adalet Merkezi, Hayata Evet, Madenciliğe Hayır ve Life Over Lityum topluluğu ağının üyesi. Özellikle lityum madenciliği konusunda bize bu sempozyumda bilgileri paylaşacak. Jessica, söz senin. Ekran paylaşarak sunumunu paylaşabilirsin. Teşekkürler.
Hello, everybody. I actually am trying to share my screen, but this is my first time doing that on this computer. Okay. I'm so sorry. Would we be able to switch order a little bit so I can share my screen? I'm gonna have to restart Zoom. I'm sorry for the technical difficulty. Or if somebody else can share my screen.
Jessica, if you want to send it to me, I can share it for you. Here,
Yeah,
let
that'd
me
be great. I just sent the link in the chat. While Jan is opening that, thank you, Jan. So yeah, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Jessica. I am living on by New York, not too far from New York City, but my family has roots in Taiwan and China. I am a postdoctoral scholar and also a member of some networks of community members and allied organizations who are resisting lithium mining. Next slide, please. And next slide. So I was going to go over today highlight some case studies of lithium mining projects in the US and community responses and resistance to that, and sort of outline some of the general patterns of this new wave of mining and also look at a few of the reform efforts that are happening in the United States. Next slide. So the sort of key point here throughout all this is that the US is developing domestic raw materials for electrification and really framing this in terms of national security at the same time that it is also pursuing, mineral resources abroad in many other places in the world. And internally and also externally, US lithium mining is largely following historic patterns of internal colonialism and extraction. And so what I mean by that, next slide, is that the United States as a country is very much founded on the dispossession and displacement of Native peoples. And so this is showing the displacement of Native Americans from traditional homelands over about 100 years, really, as the United States, as the country expanded across the continent. And, this is not to say that only Native Americans or Indigenous peoples are affected or, deserving of territorial rights and whatnot, but this is sort of the historical context of a lot of the mining and extraction that happens in the US. Next slide. And just to sort of emphasize that many, the vast majority of mineral resources for renewable energy, so-called critical minerals are located within 56 kilometers of a Native American reservation. So for lithium, that's about 80% of the lithium deposits in the US. Next slide. So this map is showing an overview of the proposed lithium mines across the United States. There are quite a lot of them scattered in the sort of western part of the country, a few in the Great Plains area, South Dakota, and then a couple in on the East Coast, closer to where I am now. And so I'm going to highlight a couple of them. Next slide. So the first one is the Thacker Pass lithium mine in northern Nevada. Next slide. So this lithium mine is a clay deposit. I'm sure a lot of you are aware there are different forms of lithium: clay, hard rock, brine. This one is clay. This area in northern Nevada is the traditional homelands of the Paiute Shoshone Native American people, and is the site of historic massacre that occurred in this area where lithium has been found. And so the Native American community has been fighting to protect the land that is, considered sacred from being unearthed and disturbed for mining. There are also a lot of impacts to wildlife, including endangered and protected species, and water. There's a lot of ranching and farming in this area too. And so the local community, both indigenous and otherwise, are really concerned about just their ability to maintain their livelihoods. This project is under the Canadian company Lithium Americas, and was fast-tracked under the Trump administration several years ago, but then continued the sort of permitting process into the Biden administration as well. Next slide. And so because of this fast tracking, the tribes and a group of environmental organizations brought a lawsuit against the Bureau of Land Management, the department that oversees these permits and land grants, over the poor environmental and cultural impact assessment that was done. Saying that there was not proper consultation on the cultural elements and also a lot of the environmental aspects. And so a couple years later, about a year ago, actually, in February 2023, the judge ruled that Lithium Americas, this company, did violate the law and the due process, but still allowed the mine to proceed. Next slide. And so the tribes sued again, specifically over the lack of consultation, and appealed. But last summer, the appeals court ruled in favor again of the mining company and the federal land agency. And so construction of this mine did begin in the past couple of months. And so this is just kind of to show that the protections for communities and the environment are still not very strong. In the US, there's a lot of laws that favor the mining companies, and even when there are processes that are supposedly meant to set up sort of checkpoints, those often don't actually prevent the mine from happening. Next slide. So the next location or site I wanted to highlight is in North Carolina, with the gray arrow there. Next slide. This area is called Gaston County, and it is a hard rock lithium deposit. So it's spodumene. The community here is mostly a white farming community. It's not as rural as the Thacker Pass, Nevada site that we just looked at. It is much closer to a city, metropolitan area. And so the residents here have pointed out that there's a lot of people who live in this area who are being affected. The mining company is called Piedmont Lithium. They're an Australian junior company, and they've been intimidating residents into selling their property, telling them that all their neighbors have sold, saying that they're going to mine right up until their property line, and so they might as well sell now because it's not going to be livable. And then they've also been burning the houses under the sort of they're saying this is training for the firefighters, but it is also operating as an intimidation tactic for the residents who haven't sold their houses yet. The company here hasn't actually achieved or obtained the proper permitting and zoning that would allow a mine to be built. So this area is not zoned for mining at the moment. And so residents are really sort of skeptical of whether they're really serious about even mining, or if this is really just sort of speculation to make money for the company without actually producing lithium. While the harms to the community, people moving away and losing land that has been in their families for many generations is already happening, whether or not the mine is being built. Next slide. So the third site that I wanted to highlight is in Southern California, very close to the border with Mexico. Next slide. And this is it's called the Salton Sea. This is a geothermal brine deposit. And so it's not, a solid form of lithium. The lithium is dissolved in water that is naturally hot and occurs deep underground, and just naturally has a lot of lithium and other minerals dissolved in it. And so the form of mining that would happen in this location is a new form of mining, where these companies are proposing to pump out the brine, extract the lithium selectively using either filters or other sort of technologies to change the chemistry of the water, and then pump the leftover brine back underground. And so they're claiming that this is more environmentally friendly than other forms of brine mining that happen in South America, that evaporate the brine to concentrate the lithium. They're saying, this is not going to evaporate the water, so it's much more environmentally friendly. However, there are still some environmental and community impacts that are kind of being glossed over. So one of them is the high use of fresh water for processing for processing the brine in this process. This area is a very hot, dry desert, and uses water from a river called the Colorado River that supplies water to a lot of this whole region of the United States. And this river is already being very heavily depleted because of intensive water use across many states. And so the communities are really worried about what that's going to do for freshwater use and freshwater supplies. This area has really high unemployment. A lot of the people here are migrant and cross-border farm workers. And so in the picture down below, you can, in the bottom left, you can see the sort of farmland that is one of the main industries, or probably the main industry in the area. And the lake there, the Salton Sea, is an artificial lake that is shrinking, partly because of changes to the water use, and this is causing high rates of asthma and other health impacts because it's exposing sort of polluted soil and dust, and that's getting into people's lungs. And so people are also worried about the health impacts that are going to come with increased freshwater use for this new lithium mining. Next slide. And so there's been a lot of investment into this area. They're calling it Lithium Valley. The investors in the state are really hyping it up as this new form of mining that's going to be green and also, transition California to an electric future. They're really highlighting the jobs and development, especially for an area that has really high unemployment. But again, the community is really worried about health, water, and also kind of skeptical about even the jobs aspect, because prior renewable energy projects have not actually created significant and sustained employment. Next slide. And so in addition to the lawsuits and things that I mentioned before, the communities in a lot of these locations have been resisting in other ways these mining projects. So in Nevada, there's multiple environmental groups and indigenous groups who have protested. At one point, they were occupying the proposed mining site and camping out there. The photo with the drums was outside the appeals court. Was a rally there. In North Carolina, the community members have been organizing themselves and putting up signs, going to town halls to really raise these questions. And in the third picture on the bottom left is not from the Salton Sea area that I was talking about earlier, but from another mining site in Arizona, where there's currently a protest walk happening against a lithium mine that would affect a sacred spring in that area, and they're walking over 3 days from the Native American reservation to the state capitol to protest the proposed lithium mine and exploration that is happening there. Next slide. And so overall, there's just this pattern of a new wave of extractivism across the country and throughout the world that features disturbance of indigenous lands and sacred sites. There is really a lack of free, prior, and informed consent, and even a lack of consultation with local communities. In a lot of cases, these processes have had the result of dividing communities, where some people, and especially the local governments, tend to be sort of swayed by investments or promises of infrastructure by the mining companies, whereas other people want to maintain whatever land or livelihood they had originally. The legal framework is just heavily in favor of the mining companies. All the the public land in the US is, at least in the West, is governed by this mining law from 1872, like literally from 1872, from the last sort of gold rush era, that allows mining companies to, or anybody, to, stake a claim and explore over a certain amount of land without going through any sort of permitting or consultation process. And so this just gives a lot of leeway to mining companies to sort of get their foot in the door. And there's, a lot of federal incentives to pursue these so-called critical mineral resources for the energy transition, for national security, under a number of justifications. Biden's defense production, or Biden invoked the Defense Production Act 2 years ago, that allows for bypassing some, processes that are normally in place in order to expedite and increase production. There's also this Infrastructure Act that pushed a lot of funding into mining projects. And at the same time, a lot of investment is actually foreign for a lot of these projects. So, for example, the Canadian Lithium Americas company in Nevada, and the Australian Piedmont Lithium mine in North Carolina, and then there's a lot of federal loans going to these companies. Just yesterday, a $2.26 billion loan was conditionally approved for Lithium Americas for that mine in Nevada. Next slide. And so there are a number of reform efforts sort of at local, state to federal levels to increase protections. In some cases, there are reform efforts to sort of decrease protections and expedite mining. And so it's worth really looking at them closely, which I won't really do now for time. But just to highlight a few, there's this Clean Energy and Minerals Reform Act, which would require, permits for exploration, requirements on water usage, rent or royalties to be paid to the local or state government. And that's sort of in contrast to this other proposed bill, the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act, which would really streamline mine permitting and expedite a lot of these projects. Those are both at the federal level. The other two on here are at the state level. Next slide. And so gonna wrap up here, but I just wanted to make one more point that these regulation efforts are kind of a mixed bag so far, but I would propose that the regulation is going to be a more powerful sort of tool for protecting communities and the environment than sort of certification programs that are also being proposed and sort of spread, and in some cases incorporated into legislation as regulation, but not really functioning in the same way. And so there are, third-party initiatives, for example, IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. These are just sort of structurally biased to serve the industry and sort of function as another level of greenwashing here. And so this is a pamphlet that one of the networks that I'm involved in, Yes to Life, No to Mining, put together. If you'd like to read more, there's a QR code in the corner of the screen. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time and having me here.
Çok teşekkürler Jessica bu güzel sunum için. Amerika'daki lityum madenciliğinin durumunu ve oradaki uluslararası kuralları, teşvikleri, destekleri senden dinledik. Yeşil ekstraktivizmin yeni bir boyutunu lityum madenciliğiyle senden dinledik. Çok teşekkür ederiz. İkinci konuşmacımıza geçmek istiyorum. Sevgili Rachmi Hertanti. Rachmi'yi pinler miyiz arkadaşlar? Rachmi bir hareket düşünce kuruluşu olan TransNational Institute'da araştırmacı ve aynı zamanda uluslararası ticaret hukuk uzmanlığına sahip bir avukat arkadaşımız. Asya-Pasifik İnsan Hakları ve Maden Çıkarmaları toplantısının da üyesi. Özellikle Endonezya'daki madencilik sektöründe uluslararası yatırım ve anlaşmalarını ve yatırım devlet anlaşmazlığının çözümüne karşı kampanyalara odaklanan çeşitli politika savunuculuğu ve kampanyalarda yer almıştır. Endonezya'nın nikel ihracat yasağı politikası hakkında bir makale yayınladı ve Endonezya'nın elektrovoltaik üretim ekosistemine özellikle de odaklanan ticaret ve tedarik zincirleriyle ilişkisi dahil olmak üzere yeşil enerjiye geçiş için mineral geçişlerindeki mevcut eğilimleri izledi. Sevgili Rachmi, beni duyuyor musun? Mikrofonunu açarsan seni...
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah. Okay. So shall I
Rachmi,
share the
before
screen?
you start, can I say something? Let's see if I say it right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Rakyat,
I
bersatı,
can't hear you actually.
takdisadi kalakan.
Hello.
Rakyat, bersatu, takdisadi kalakan. Do you hear me, Rachmi?
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, I think I didn't
Birleşik
hear
Halklar
some
Yenilmez bu
words
slogan
on the
şeyde
translations.
Endonezya'da
So
sık sık kesilmişti. Endonezyalıların bir sloganıydı. Evet, the floor is yours.
yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me
Duyuyoruz.
very well? Yeah. Okay. So I will share my screen. All right. Yeah. So first, thank you for the wait. I need to. Okay. Thank you for the invitations, and it's a pleasure to join in these great sessions. I'm here also to represent the Asia-Pacific gatherings on human rights and extractives that co-host the thematic social forum on mining last October 2023. And I'm really glad that I can share these reflections with this global audience. So basically, my presentations will be some reflections from our Asia-Pacific Gathering webinar on the right to say no, and also the results from the second Global Thematic Social Forum on Mining and Extractives Economy last year in Indonesia. At least I have 5 focus in my presentations. So I will start first from the context of political and historical context that driving the right to say no in Asia-Pacific. I think first, like our African and Latin American counterparts, much of Asia-Pacific fell under the colonialisms. And in many instances, it's the same colonial powers that are exerting the pressure for more extractive projects. And even if these colonial powers are not the direct owners or operators of mining projects impacting our lives, the end destination of most minerals and the profits from these minerals eventually go to the developed countries, the former colonizers itself. And of course, we must also recognize that in our region, in Asia Pacific, the economic and political power of China is also a significant driving force on oil, gas, and mineral extractions. And on the second political historical context, actually, it is really clear, yeah. So in the past years, the corporations have become more powerful and influential in the politics and governance of our countries. Like in the Philippines and Indonesia, I guess it's really clear how sometimes the beneficial owners of mining or oil corporations also connecting with the several elites in our country that captured by the interests of the corporate interests. And I think this creates the dilemma if elected government officials who make our laws and implement the same laws are owner of the extractive corporations. And the third context is I think in the recent implementations of mining and extractive projects, both corporations and governments have justified these projects as necessary for development and are trade-offs for economic growth. And I guess many companies and government regulatory agencies are also now forced to expand the coverage of costs and mining to include health, social, and environmental costs. In the context of the fourth political and historical context, I guess in relation to the current economic and political context is about the emerging trend of mineral transitions. Like last year, when we held the second Global Thematic Social Forum on Mining and Extractive Economy in Semarang, Indonesia, in this conference, we discussed that the expansions of mineral extractions to legitimate green transitions. And in the declarations of the TSF, for example, we mentioned that we are very worried that the increased drive for mining of the purported critical or strategic or transition minerals and other resources for the new digital and green technologies and the blue economy, of course, has become the driving force for further intensified extractivisms, bringing frontline communities to more vulnerable positions while posing a great threat to their lives. And it's resulting the creations of new sacrifice zones, especially. And the last context of political and historical, the most important recent context, however, is the increasing awareness and capacities of affected communities to understand their rights, protect these rights, and demand accountability from the government and corporations. And the affected communities and their issues have become visible, and they are no longer weak, faceless, or voiceless. In this slide, I guess the Asia-Pacific groups has put our agenda on how women should lead the struggle on the right to say no itself. When we organized the Asia-Pacific webinar on the right to say no, there was a deliberate decisions to focus on the experiences of women leading the campaign against extractive mining. And in many cases, it was indigenous women who were the voices and faces of these struggles. We simply wanted to highlight that there are differences on the impacts of these mining projects to women, where they are not only as mothers, but also as wives, daughters, and grandmothers that has a lot of burdens of impacts in relations to this in the context of the extractives agenda. So I guess it is really clear, yeah. We're very conscious to have a decisions to ask our woman-led organizations such as like Datri in India, Resistor and WAMA in Philippines, for example, or JATAM, anti-mining work of JATAM, ATM, and other organizations in Asia-Pacific gathering, where we know that we don't have time to discuss in detail, but I guess it is really clear that sometimes the gender differentiated impacts of mining to women, we can mention on some aspect like the loss of primary sources of livelihoods, reduced access to water and food for the family, direct impact to nutrition, health, and well-being of family members. And I think in Indonesia case study itself, we listened to the grief mother who lost their children because they fell into the deaths to the coal mine pits scattered in their locality. And also recognizing this, we are able to highlight the roles and contributions of women to these struggles. Like women facilitate organizing the local communities. Women also lead the public actions against destructive activities that destroy their farms and fishing grounds. And also women bringing the fight to the gates of national leaders at the capital. So it is a more emotional image when mothers and grandmothers demand actions from government officials. And as I said earlier, our experience, I mean, we don't exclude any gender or class in this context, but we believe that everyone can contribute to our advocacy to promote the right to say no. And in the context of our work in Asia-Pacific in relations to the advocacy and campaign on the right to say no, I guess we have agreed that actually we propose 4 elements how to construct our evolving concept of the right to say no. First, about the law itself. So laws exist to protect us, and these laws must be properly and meaningfully implemented. So if the law requires the free, prior, and informed consent of communities, then this should be secured first before any company starts to dig. So if certain areas are declared as protected areas or no-go zones for mining, then this should not be open up for any mining applications. And the second elements that we want to push actually about the how the government must regulate the corporations itself. So in this context, we should be able to demand from our governments that they must regulate the behavior of corporations. And of course, if the government is unable to do this, then the affected communities must have at least a remedy to insist no against a project. Therefore, the Right to Say No campaign is based on the efforts to regulate transnational corporations internationally, especially through the adoption of the United Nations Binding Treaty on Business and Human Rights. Actually, this is an ongoing advocacy agenda of the people's movement at the global level and has been working since 2014. A binding treaty that locks corporations into respecting the human rights of people affected by their operations, combined with campaigns for the right to say no, expressed through the principles of free, prior, and informed consent, could go some way in reversing the power of TNCs. And the third elements that we want to bring in the advocacy and campaign work in the right to say no, actually, about the reality of climate change. So many of our mining laws actually are outdated. So in recent laws, I guess they remain climate blind. And as I have mentioned earlier, most of these laws and policies actually also gender blind. So the right to say no exactly complements these necessary evolutions and amendments of our law. So we say no to destructive mining projects because we want to be better prepared to face the impacts of climate change and disaster. And the last elements that we want to highlight also in these presentations actually how the important to recognize that communities must own, manage, and control the access to their natural resources. I think in the second Global Thematic Social Forum declarations, we reaffirm the need to strengthen the right to say no as the main campaign and advocacy based on the principle where the right to say no is the right to defend our communities and our rights, including the right to self-determinations, guardianships, and the right to healthy environment, among others. In relations with the experience in Asia-Pacific, I guess we also propose here, or at least we can share several strategies that we use how to strengthen our advocacy and campaign work in relations to the right to say no in our regions. I think first, documentation, gathering evidence, and using factual data to inform our arguments is really important. So it's very necessary, at least to documenting about all cases, yeah, and how to share it and develop or creates the solidarity amongst the affected communities itself. On the second things, actually how to build the capacities of our champions. Actually, it means that we mean that our champions can come from many sources. So of course, the affected communities themselves, like the local leaders, are the main actor in this champion context. And the third, generating solidarity from all stakeholders is very important. So not only create relationships between the communities, but also how to link the relationship with church and other religions organizations that support our struggles, select political leaders, and even some conscientious corporate leaders that were it sometimes could useful for our agenda on the right to say no. And of course, popularize our struggle using media, traditional, mainstream, and social, especially on the digital aspect. And the fifth strategy that we use also how to build networks from local, national, and international. Lastly, I just want to share with you about the TSF 2023 action agenda that needed to be followed up. I guess it is really clear in the conference on the action agenda that where the right to say no is actually the center of the struggles against the extractivisms, particularly in responding the current mineral transitions for energy transition agenda. And the right to say no as the main element of the TSF 2023 action agenda, at least there are 5 action agenda that we have developed. First, the important to upholding the right to say no. Second, reclaiming the narrative of just transition and defining an inclusive just transition. The third, holding actors accountable. Fourth, promoting alternatives to extractivisms. Fifth, coordinating global and local actions. In the context of upholding the right to say no, as we're experiencing also from the work in Asia-Pacific, I guess there are several things that we can continue this campaign by, I think, first collectively mobilize and empower grassroots communities, including women frontline defenders, to resist extractivist projects in their communities. Second, develop collective strategies to respond and resist corporate tactics to intimidate and pressure communities, counteract state repressions and pressure governments to uphold laws and mechanisms to protect human rights and environment. The third thing is actually strengthen the regional and global solidarity to elevate the voices of communities affected by extractivism in the right to say no. And the fourth, how we can also identify and share alternatives and solutions, including highlighting positive stories of how communities mobilize to work together in solidarity. And my last point, actually, I would like to also invite you all to connect with this initiative in developing strong regional, national, and local gatherings in between global gatherings to solidify collective strategy and coordination from the bottom up. I guess you can visit later the TSF mining websites to see more details about the action agenda, especially on the right to say no advocacy and campaign. also in our declarations. Thank you very much. I will end my presentation here.
Sevgili Rachmi'ye çok teşekkür ederim. TSP Mining Sosyal Forum 2025'te Latin Amerika ülkelerinden birinde olacak. O zaman Türkiye'den daha kalabalık bir ekip orada olmak dileğiyle diyelim. Bu sefer yalnız ben gidebilmiştim Endonezya'dakine. Slaytlarda kendimi de görünce çok mutlu oldum Rachmi. Teşekkür ederim. Evet, üçüncü uluslararası konuşmacımız da sevgili Jean Morel. Jean Earthworks'te çalışıyor Ocak 2021'den itibaren. Atık kampanya yöneticisi. Atık adı verilen maden atıklarını ve madencilik şirketlerinin karı güvenliğin önüne koymasıyla ortaya çıkan sosyal, çevresel ve kültürel felaketlere odaklanıyor. Jean, Brezilya, Dominik Cumhuriyeti, Güney Afrika ve ötesi de dahil olmak üzere dünya çapında tehlikeli atık depolama tesislerinden doğrudan etkilenen topluluklarla çalışıyor. Ek olarak atık depolamada yerel, bölgesel ve uluslararası düzeyde en iyi uygulamaları yükseltmeyi amaçlıyor. Jean, toplulukları, işçileri ve çevreyi iklim değişikliğinden korumaya amaçlayan 36 ülkeden 164 ön saf topluluklar grubu, yerel halklar, sivil toplum kuruluşları, akademisyenler ve uzmanlar tarafından onaylanan bir dizi kılavuz olan Önce Güvenlik, Sorumlu Maden Atıkları Yönetimi kılavuzların ortak yazarlarından birisi. Dünya çapındaki binlerce atık tesisinin oluşturduğu risklerle ilgili yönetim kılavuzu da sanıyorum onları da içeriyor. Evet, Can madencilik uygulamalarından en çok etkilenen toplulukların madencilik şirketleri ve hükümetler tarafından alınan ve hayatlarını etkileyen kararlarda söz sahibi olması gerektiğine inanıyor. Bu çok tehlikeli gördükleri mayınlara hayır deme hakkında içermekte. Can, hafriyat, ekstraktivizm işlerine gelmeden önce El Salvador'da madenciliğin ülkenin kıt su kaynakları üzerindeki etkilerinden endişe duyan toplum temelli ve ulusal kuruluşları destekleyerek 5 yıl geçirdi. El Salvador'daki toplumsal hareket sonunda hükümeti tüm metal madenciliği konusunda türünün bir örneği olarak yasaklamaya geçişe zorladı. Bu süre zarfında Can, El Salvador'daki madencilik karşıtı hareketi destekleyen düzinelerce uluslararası kuruluşlara da koordinasyon sağladı. Evet sevgili Can, söz sende. Katılımın için çok teşekkür ederiz.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I'm very happy to be out with all of you. Unfortunately, can't be there in person, but thank you for that also kind introduction. I think that was really comprehensive, so I won't spend too much time talking about myself, but just a little bit more about my organization, Earthworks. We're a US-based NGO that works with communities inside the United States and internationally to confront the dangerous practices of the extractive industry and to promote policies that improve on the current system around extraction and look for sustainable solutions. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the threats that mining poses to communities, ecosystems, and the climate. I suspect that some of the things that I'm going to present maybe were already covered by other presenters today, so I'll try to focus more on my specialty, which is mine waste and mine tailings, and some of the dangers that mine waste pose to communities and ecosystems. But just quickly, to remind ourselves, in case we haven't heard it enough today, that I'm so sorry. Have I been on mute this whole time? Let me go back a couple. Oops. Sorry. Anyway, so thank you for the invitation to be here. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person, but it's great to be with you all virtually. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I won't go over to, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes,
okay, great. So I can continue. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the confusion. So again, mining is a risk to water. We see that very strongly in the United States, and heard a little bit from Jessica about how mining has impacted the United States. But some statistics that I find particularly helpful are that in the US, for example, 40% of the headwaters of the rivers in the western part of the country have been contaminated by mining. Research shows that mining companies are not good at predicting what their impacts on water will be. A study that was done a number of years ago found that when comparing mining companies' predictions on water in their environmental impact assessments with their actual outcomes in terms of groundwater and surface water contamination, 76% of companies were unable to identify future contamination. I think that's a really important statistic to consider when we're talking about permitting new mines, because mining companies they don't know what their impacts on water will be. But we know that the vast majority are polluting either surface water or groundwater or both. And that often happens through a process called acid mine drainage, which you can see here in this picture. I'm assuming that we've covered that today in the conference, but essentially acid mine drainage, once it starts, is irreversible. There's acid mine drainage in Europe, in Spain, from mining that happened during the Roman times. So it's very important to have a complete understanding of the potential impacts on water when we're talking about mining operations. Mining is also a climate risk. 10% of greenhouse gas emissions in the energy sector come from mining. And there's a new study that has just come out in the last couple of weeks that actually show that 7 metals, the mining of 7 specific metals, are responsible for 7% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions. So we can't look to mining as a solution for the climate crisis. We're not going to replace dirty fossil fuels with dirty mining and expect to have solutions that lead us away from global warming and climate emergencies. Mining is also a risk to air, soil, and human health. I think you've heard a little bit more already today about impacts on human health. But it's really important to understand that mining operations create a number of forms of pollutants, which can be dried out and turned into dust that can be carried for hundreds of kilometers, that can impact water, soil, and crops, especially if there are, farming communities nearby. Livestock can be impacted. In this picture on the bottom right, you can see cattle drinking from a water polluted in Brazil after a tailings dam failure. And it's important to understand that oftentimes heavy metals, arsenic, other toxins that are present in contamination from mining are bioaccumulators. So if they're in if they're in the soil and you plant corn in that soil, they will be in the corn. If a person eats the corn, then they will be in the person's body. So they go through food chains and ecosystems, and therefore they can have a much greater impact than other types of contaminants might. But so I'm going to focus a little bit more on mine waste and the risks presented by mine waste. One of the major sources of mine waste is called tailings. Tailings are essentially the trash of mining. So once you take the ore out of the ground, it's processed with chemicals and water. And then the metals that the mining company is looking to extract are removed, and there's a bunch of waste that's left over. Tailings are, mining is an inherently dirty industry, and there are massive quantities of tailings that are being currently produced around the globe. Estimates say that there are probably between 20 or 30,000 tailings dams around the world. I've heard recently that number might be as high as 60,000 tailings dams. And these are some of the biggest man-made structures on planet Earth. There are tailings dams all over the world that are up to 250 meters high. They are kilometers long on their face, and they store hundreds of millions of cubic meters of mine waste. there are tailings dams that can be seen from outer space. So just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of tailings dams and the risks that they can pose to downstream communities and ecosystems. Research has shown that tailings dams are failing with increasing frequency and severity. So we're seeing more failures, and we're seeing bigger tailings dam failures over time. And some of the risk factors that are that contribute to tailings dams failures have to do with their design. So unlike a water retention dam, unlike a hydroelectric dam, tailings dams are not made out of concrete or steel or other construction materials. They're made out of tailings themselves and other forms of mine waste, which means that they are earthen dams that are storing hundreds of millions of cubic meters of mine waste. This makes them very susceptible to failure or to collapse. And some of the risk factors that influence tailings dam collapses are things like increased water accumulating behind the dam. So climate change is a huge risk to tailings dams because we're seeing more erratic weather patterns. We're seeing bigger storms that mining companies did not account for when they were planning and designing their dams. Earthquakes are also a risk for tailings dams and can lead to tailings dam failures. Dams are getting bigger and more risky because ore grades are declining around the world. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. I think it's there's interesting statistics. And then also mining companies don't want to spend money building tailings dams. Tailings are waste. It impacts their bottom line to spend more money on storing their waste. They want to reduce their cost as much as possible so that they can increase their profits, which means that oftentimes mining companies are not choosing the safest technologies to store tailings. They're not using international best practices or engineering best practices, and that can have a really detrimental impact on the safety of the dams. One thing to note is that leading tailings engineers and experts have said that tailings dams failures are inevitable in the long run because a tailings dam exists in perpetuity. When mining operations end after 10 years, after 15 years, the tailings dams are not decommissioned, they're not torn down, the waste isn't moved somewhere else, they're left on that site forever. And it is impossible for a government or a mining company to commit to maintain a tailings dam forever. A tailings dam that is built today, who's going to maintain it in 200 years? Who's going to maintain it in 300 years, 500 years? And if tailings dams are not properly monitored and maintained, eventually they will collapse. So when communities and governments are considering whether or not they want a mine, it's very important to take into account that that tailings dam will be there forever, and eventually, someday, it will likely collapse. Going back to the point about ore grades, I think it's important to have some context as to why we have so much mine waste. And that's because all of the high grade ore deposits around the world have basically already been mined. So for example, in order to get 1 gram of gold, a mine has to remove 3 million tons of waste for 1 gram of gold. In order to get 1 ton of copper, they're removing 513 tons of ore. So they're basically producing 512 tons of waste for 1 ton of copper. So as we have mined all of these high-grade ore bodies, and now we're going to low-grade ore bodies, we are making more and more waste. And that's what you can see in these graphs. This top one is gold, where we used to have these high-grade ore deposits, and now we're like down here. And then the bottom one is copper. So what can go wrong with tailings dam failures? Here are some examples of recent tailings, the kind of most recent, most catastrophic tailings dams failures. The first on this list was the Mont Poly mine in British Columbia that failed in 2014 and released 200 million cubic meters of mine waste into the local habitat. that was a source of salmon fishing and subsistence for 23 indigenous communities in the area. Then in 2015, the Mariana tailings dam failed at the São Marco mine in Brazil. It killed 19 people. The tailings flowed for 600 kilometers, and it was called the worst environmental disaster in the history of Brazil. And then 4 years later, a second tailings dam failed in Brazil, in Brumadinho, that was operated by the same mining company, Vale, which killed 272 people and impacted 3 million people via contamination in local waterways. So what are some of the impacts, social and cultural impacts of tailings dam failures? Obviously, human lives are lost. In recent history in Brazil, over 300 people have died from mine tailings failures. Community lives are destroyed. There's urban migration where people who were living in rural areas lost their housing, lost their communities, are forced to live in cities. There's the emotional trauma of communities that survived tailings dam failures. There's a lot of research coming out of Brazil right now that shows a really marked increase, a significant increase in mental health problems and mental health diseases in communities that have survived tailings dam failures because of that trauma. There are economic impacts. So agriculture is affected when water sources are polluted, obviously, but also things like tourism decline. And so the local economy is no longer able to function as it used to. Indigenous rights and sovereignty are impacted, where indigenous peoples that live in the area of a tailings dam failure no longer can either access their land or can't have sovereignty over the use of their land. There's infrastructure damage, and then environmental racism, where oftentimes these projects are built next to the most vulnerable and the most marginalized communities. There's also a practice of dumping mine waste directly into the ocean. Currently, it's estimated that about 220 million tons of tailings are dumped into rivers, lakes, and oceans each year. This practice is still currently being used or proposed in Norway, Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia, although Indonesia has put a temporary hold on new projects. But basically, there's long-term lasting effects of dumping mine waste into oceans and other waterways that should never be allowed. Jessica already talked about this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but mining disproportionately harms indigenous people. She gave us some great statistics about the United States, but to put that into context globally, 74% of the mines proposed for the so-called energy transition are on or near indigenous or peasant lands. So when we look at where mining projects are being proposed, their harms, the potential harms of these projects, are going to impact certain groups much more than others. That's why we believe it's very important that the right to free, prior, informed consent of indigenous peoples is respected, and that has been codified in the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Jessica already helped us also kind of understand very much understand the context in the United States around mining. But just to kind of hit home, I think it's very important, because oftentimes countries like the United States or Canada are held up as best practice. We're these jurisdictions that have strong mining regulations, and so therefore we're exemplary and in the way that we mine. But in the United States, that's very much not the case. Like Jessica mentioned, our mining law is from 1872. It's 150 years old. It defines mining as the highest and best use of public land. It has no environmental regulations. It has no regulations on mine waste or tailings dams. It does not include federal royalties. So the US government makes $0 off mining in the United States, and there's no recognition of indigenous rights. We do have the Environmental Protection Act in the United States, but unfortunately, it doesn't allow decision makers to deny a mine permit based on the adverse environmental impacts. So really what this had led to is 500,000 abandoned mines in the United States, polluting 40% of the rivers in the western half of the state, in the western half of the country. and 40 which is the largest toxic polluter in the United States. Also, as we've heard today, I don't want to talk too much about it, but mining is being promoted as the solution to climate change, as the solution for the energy transition, but we see that very much as greenwashing. And mining companies are taking advantage of that to be able to make more money, increase speculation in the industry, and really profit off the need to transition away from fossil fuels. So just to finish up here, I do want to share a little bit about what we have developed as proposals to dangerous mine waste practices. So we worked, as was mentioned in the very kind introduction, we worked with communities around the globe to identify 17 guidelines to improve mine waste storage facilities, to improve tailings dams. And these focus on basically 4 different areas. One is prioritizing safety over profits. So making sure that the best technology is being used, making sure that there are accurate and appropriate engineering guidelines in place, making sure that technologies that have been proven to be risky, like upstream tailings dams, are not used at any cost. Secondly, the guidelines focus on participation and democracy. So the right of communities to say no, free and prior informed consent for Indigenous peoples, the right to participate in decisions that are made around siting, maintenance, and use of tailings dams. They focus on corporate accountability, so making sure the board of directors is responsible for mine safety and tailing safety, making sure that there is appropriate financial assurances in place so that if a mining company goes bankrupt, the local government and taxpayers are not left cleaning up the mess that they leave behind. And then lastly, the guidelines focus on transparency and access to information. So any information related to safety of tailings dams should be made publicly available. Communities should have access to independent technical experts to be able to understand the situation regarding tailings. And lastly, we know that the safest tailings dam is the one that isn't built. So we need to look for ways to reduce primary raw material extraction, and that includes circular economy, that includes recycling, that includes reuse of tailings in safe ways within mine sites, and basically any way in a number of steps to avoid the storage of tailings above ground, which pose a threat to communities and ecosystems. So lastly, just a slide, happy to share these with my contact information. We do have Safety First, mostly translated into Turkish. There's a little bit of work to go to get that across the finish line. If this document would be useful to anyone for their work, please reach out to me and I'm happy to work with you to get that information to you. Also, like I mentioned, Earthworks supports communities impacted by mining projects. So if there's anyone participating today that could use some campaign support, some advocacy support, access to technical experts around mine waste or mine pollution, please reach out because we'd be happy to talk about if there are ways for us to collaborate. All right, thank you very much. I hope I haven't gone too far over time.
Sevgili Can, çok teşekkür ediyoruz. En iyi atık barajı inşa edilmemiş atık barajıdır sözüne de bayıldık diyelim, değil mi? En güvenli. Evet, en iyi maden de çıkartılmamış maden diyelim. Evet sevgili arkadaşlar, 3 konuşmacımızı da dinledik. Sorularımız varsa alalım. Mikrofonu verebilir miyiz? Şurada bir mikrofonumuz var. İlk seni nasıl gösterebiliriz? Evet. Ya da buraya gelir misin? İlk sen. Ha, tamam.
Mikrofondan ses bilgisayardan gidiyor. Bırakmana gerek yok. Bizimkiler de oradan.
Ha, sen online'sın değil mi?
Evet,
Evet,
ben
aslında
Türkçe
seni
konuşuyorum.
gösteriyor. Tamam.
Tamam, bakıyorum şimdi. Benim 3 tane sorum olacak. Yavaş yavaş konuşacağım. Çevrilebilmesi için. Bunlardan yani sıra takip ediyorum. İsimleri söyleyememiş olabilirim.
Jessica.
Evet, birincisi Jessica. Bu Taker Pass bizim takip ettiğimiz bir savunma alanı. Orada degrowth talebi var. İnternette de görebiliyoruz zaten bu talebi. Buna karşı bir cevap alınabildi mi acaba toplumdan veya yetkililerden bir geri dönüş olabildi mi acaba? Çünkü çok önemli buluyorum bu taleplerini. Hacker Pass'la ilgili bunu sordum. İkincisi Rachmi. Şimdi kendisi eşit rızadan bahsetti. Fakat biz bugün oturumumuzun başında ve kendi hayatlarımızdan dikkatlice gözlemlediğimiz üzere yerel halkın manipüle edilmesi söz konusu madenlerin açılma süreçlerinde. Evet, bir grup insan, bir grup yerli halk gerçekten direnip, gerçekten kanmayıp, gerçekten bir duruş sergileyebiliyor ama bazen yapılar, finansal yapılar bu yerli halkın manipüle edilmesine meydan verecek bazı yollar açıyorlar ve orada yerli halkın kendi kararlarını vermesi doğanın veya toplumun üstün yararlarının değil, zararına olan bir tutum oluyor. Bilmiyorum demek istediğimi anlatabilirim. Bununla ilgili sizin de karşılaştığınız örnekler var mı? Ve yani varsa bir önlem alabildiniz mi diye soracağım. Son evet, oturumdaki Şan'la en sorun burada. Çok güzel şekilde Amerikan kamuoyunun da çok etkili bir kampanya yürüttüğünüzü gözlemledik. Çok teşekkürler. Hem de aynı şekilde inanıyorum ki İliç'te oluşan maden faciasında da buradan bir eklemlenmeler buradaki arkadaşlarla devam edecektir. Bir ortak çalışmalar olabileceğini hayal ediyorum şu anda. Benim merakım Amerikan toplumunun acaba sadece kendi ülkesinde olup bitenlere karşı mı bir duyarlılık geliştirdiği, acaba onların içinde belli bir yüzde offshore bir şekilde kendi ülkelerinin yatırımlarının bazı felaketlere yol açabildiğini de görebiliyorlar mı? Çok uzun bir cümleler kurdum ama umarım olmuştur, yani anlaşılabilmişimdir. Teşekkür ediyorum ben.
Evet, başka soru alabilir miyiz? Deniz?
Nasıl yapıyoruz?
Halime sana tutabilir şeyi şimdi. Ha, sen ya da
Merhabalar. Her üç konuşmacıya da çok teşekkürler. Ben üçüne de sormak istiyorum. Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde ve Asya-Pasifik ülkelerinde maden karşıtı hareketin özneleri, aktivistler baskılarla karşılaşıyorlar mı? Ne tür baskılarla karşılaşıyorlar? Bunun için ortak bir mücadele zemini oluşturulmuş durumda mı? Aktivistlerin korunması, haklarının korunmasına yönelik bir çabanız da var mı? Teşekkür ederim.
Halimeciğim.
Ee, Her üç sunum için çok teşekkür ederim öncelikle. Sorum Jessica'ya olacaktı. Daha doğrusu Canan ve Jessica'ya olacaktı. Jessica'ya sorum şu, yeni öğrendim ben 1872 yılında maden yazısı. Bununla ilgili biraz daha detaylı bilgi verebilir ve o günden bugüne hiçbir rapor yapılmadığını anlaşılıyor. Sebeplerinde jenerasyon
Biraz daha yakın tutar mısın?
Evet, sırada tekrarlayayım. 1870 sorun psikaya, 1872 bilen maden yasası o yıldan bu yıla hiçbir rapor yapılmadı. Biraz daha detay verebilir ve ne getiriyor madenciler için? Ya bir yurttaş, bir yurttaşı eli sallayarak dağda tepede maden haberleri uzun zaman çıkartabiliyor. Jeneraliste soru şu olacaktı. Bu bilgileri de açıkçası teyit için soruyorum. Çet süreci, Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde 1970'li yıllarda başladığına dair bir bilgi var bende. Doğru mu? Bu soruyu teyit edebilir mi? Çet süreci ne zaman başladı? Birleşik Devletleri'nde. İkincisi gene 1970'li yıllarda maden ocakları ödül tamamladıktan sonra ve rehabilitasyon zorunluluğu maden şirketlerinde gene 1970'li yıllarda sorun, yasal olarak sorumlu. Bu bilgilendik bilgi doğru. Üçüncü soru ise şu anda 1700'lü yıllardan özellikle 1970'li yıllara kadar Amerika'daki maden ocaklarının tekrar rehabilitasyonu için kaç milyar dolara ihtiyaç var? Bununla ilgili bir bilginiz var mı? Çok teşekkür ederim.
Ben bir soru sorabilir miyim? Soru çıkarsa çevirmen lazım. Şahane sunumlarınızdan dolayı teşekkür ediyorum. Uluslararası bir dayanışmanın örneğini sergilediğimiz için de ayrıca çok mutluluk duyuyorum. Sorum her üçümüzde de olacak. Geçtiğimiz günlerde Avrupa Birliği'nde ekolojistlerin kriminalize edilmesiyle ilgili bir çalışma olduğunu kamuoyuna öğrendik. Bu yönde sizin ülkelerinizde de bir hazırlık var mı? Ve dünyada bu yönde nasıl bir kaygı, gelecek bekliyorsunuz? Bunu paylaşmak isteriz. Teşekkür ederim.
Bunun için çok teşekkür ederim. Benim öğrenmek istediğim şey şu aslında. Maden konusu gündeme geldi. Bugün madeni çok konuştuk burada. Ama maden konusunu aslında bu kadar çok yaygın ve çok fazla yapılıyor olmasının arkasında da aslında kapitalizmin olduğunu düşünüyorum. Ve daha fazla üretmek, daha fazla tükettirmek ve daha kötü, kalitesiz ürünler üretmek gibi bir süreçler var. Ve bu süreçler sonucunda da aslında daha fazla enerji, daha fazla maden talebi ortaya çıkıyor. Dolayısıyla şimdi biz burada aslında ekoloji mücadelesini yürütürken kapitalizmi de eleştiren bir mücadele yapıyoruz. Bu dünyada da böyle mi? Sizin ortada, Amerika'da da ya da diğer ülkelerde de böyle mi? Ve bu konuda çok merak ettiğim konu. Teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler bu güzel sunumlar için. Ben sorum Şaner. Şimdi temel ilkeler, atıklarla ilgili madencilik temel ilkeleri belirlerken önce güvenlik, katılımcılık ve demokrasi, kurumsal hesap verebilirlik, şeffaflık ve bilgiye erişim dediniz. Bizim ülkemizde ne yazık ki bunların hiçbiri yok. Sizde durum nasıl? Aynen yasalarda olduğu gibi bizde de çünkü yasalar son derece
Epey soru oldu. Yeterlik verelim mi sorulara? Evet. Yine aynı sırayla konuşmacılarımız sorulara yanıt verirse çok teşekkür ederiz. Jessica senden başlayalım. Mikrofonunu açarsan.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Evet. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll try to cover as much as I can. Those are all really, really great questions. So one of them was about oppression of anti-mining resistance and activism. Yes, that is absolutely a feature of the resistance efforts here and the pressure to mine. So, for example, I think this was last summer, there was another effort to occupy the site of mining exploration and construction in Nevada, the Thacker Pass area. And at least one person, it might have been multiple people, were arrested and, you know, had to go through the legal defense and everything. This is not just mining, but, you know, sort of land protection efforts in general. So there were also arrests of people who were protesting the border wall construction and things like that. As far as and you know, the laws in the US, there are places that are certainly more repressive of protests and activism, but it's not like the laws in the US are meant to actually really protect people. Like they're very much to protect property and yeah, industry. So that's not great. In terms of like, you know, what to do about that, I think that's a big question for all of us and everybody who's engaged in these kinds of things, and there aren't really easy answers to that besides to have really strong, you know, organization and you know, strategy, and to really be intentional with what kinds of actions and effects people are engaging in to make sure that the risks are worth it. As far as the U.S. interest in global issues, I think was meant for Jan, but I think that I can also speak to that a little bit. I do think that there's a little insularity to the U.S. It is a very large country, and we tend to just focus on ourselves. So, for example, at the TSF, the social forum that Rachmi was talking about, there were very few delegates from North America, and I was the only person from the United States. And then there was one person from Canada, and a second person from Canada who was supposed to come, but I think there were travel issues. So, you know, I think there is a need for a greater global solidarity. I think there is interest in it, especially amongst Indigenous activists and activists who are dealing with these, you know, critical minerals mining projects that are very much tied to a global system of extraction and a global energy transition that is largely occurring in the global north, but is taking from everywhere. So, I mean, that's something that I would really like to help to facilitate. That kind of ties in also to the question of communities being split by you know, companies, the state, and everything. So in addition to some of the communities across the US, I'm also in touch with some of the communities in South America, in the sort of northern Andean region, where lithium mining has been occurring for many decades. This is where the sort of classic brine evaporation ponds are. So like one thing that I have done a few years ago was to organize a delegation of community members from Chile and Argentina to visit California, which is where I was living at the time, to talk to, you know, environmental justice groups there. At that time, I didn't know that there was lithium exploration happening in the United States and in California. But because of some of the connections that we made with Indigenous activists in that area of California, that was how I ended up getting involved in the lithium mining in Arizona, because they kind of knew each other and knew that, you know, there was this connection to lithium mining in South America already. So, you know, some of those connections are happening, especially with the sort of growth and spread of the online networks and Zoom meetings and everything that make this more possible, and all the translation efforts as well. Thank you very much to the translators here. But in Chile, I visited in January for the first time since before the pandemic, and it was really notable how much the divisions of the community had increased. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the economic precarity that was increased during the pandemic, with an area that relies largely on tourism for alternate sources of income besides mining. And so, you know, when people weren't traveling, there was a lot more, even more pressure to take funding and concessions from the mining companies. There's also been a sort of like increase in these sort of certification initiatives like IRMA, which I mentioned before, that I think have been affecting the sort of united fronts that may have existed before, that were more resistant to mining. You know, saying this is a way that mining can be done in a less harmful way, and sort of opening that door a little bit more. And then, yeah, just to say that those divisions are very much present in kind of anywhere you look, where mining is trying to come in. It's sort of the mining playbook is to divide and the community, and, you know, and break those down. And so I think a lot of the resistance to that is social and cultural, like sort of the values and the traditions grounding of the community that sort of make it what it is, seem to be really important in sort of countering the allure of, you know, the money and the whatever else the mining company is offering. So things like the traditional herding lifestyles, or, you know, for example, in North Carolina, people who really want to ranch horses and cows and maintain like an agricultural way of life. You know, the people who are really attached to those things are the ones who are kind of pushing back the hardest against the mining companies. I can pass it over to Rachmi.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I think from the questions, I identify there are 3 questions at least that I would like to respond. First, in relations to the sometimes the decision of local communities itself not in favor of the other groups in the societies. I just want to highlight in some specific cases in Indonesia, for example, like in Sulawesi and North Maluku, I guess because the EV projects mostly in this area and related with the indigenous people community, one examples or one observations that we found in several advocacy experiences that we had, the splits between the communities, especially led by the community's leader, because sometimes the companies or even the state's officials, the government officials try to use the community leaders, how to influence the community leaders where they have the high positions to take decisions. But on the other side, they put aside a woman's role or even a woman's right in making decisions for the communities itself. Because sometimes the patriarchy system in the decision-making process, at least in the community level itself, always marginalize the role of women itself. So they try to legitimate, the community leaders try to hijack the woman's roles in the discussions or even in the decision-making process. So I think that's quite happened a lot. Why then? Because sometimes the role of women in the struggle against extractivism, even in the campaign on the right to say no, they're very strong. But then when the community leaders took decisions with the different positions with the woman's agenda, that's quite very problematic. In fact, it's really hard for the woman itself how to influence decision-making process with the community's leaders. I guess that's why it is really important how to strengthen the woman's mainstreaming agenda of women's rights in every level of struggles against extractivisms. Because sometimes, because of the dominance of male dominance in every level of decision-making process, make very problematic with the woman's positions itself. So I guess it is really important for us on how we put the woman as the main actors in our advocacy and campaign in the context of the right to say no. On the second questions about the operations, of course, as you know, in Indonesia, the EV production ecosystem, it becomes the national priority projects. So any kind of protests or even the demonstrations against these national priority projects, it will face an operations not only from the police but sometimes the paramilitary that paid by the companies, for example. So I mean, because when the government put the national priority projects as their like a special zones where you cannot you cannot really against the decisions of the governments on this project. So of course, it is really hard, yeah, sometimes for the communities itself, how to against the criminalizations, because very often the community are facing the criminalizations from the corporations when they are trying to protest or even to reject the development of the project itself. So one of the strategy that we have built together among the civil society, including with the movement itself, actually how we can strengthen our capacity on the legal advocacy tools, where also we need sometimes the legal lawyers, for example, to really support our struggles in the area. Because with the criminalizations, it's really hard for us to really realize our campaigns on the right to say no. And the last questions, I guess I have to say, before our government and our parliament passed the omnibus law, I hope several of you knew that Indonesia has revised dozens of national laws, and now we have omnibus law. Previously, we have a very strong environmental law that put the destructions of environmental as a criminal law, or at least the government can put sanctions when the corporate make a disaster on environmental destructions. But with this new kind of law, it is hardly to say that we can use, because they already removed and revised the law with the new articles. So I guess, unfortunately, that in Indonesia, because the agenda of EV battery ecosystem productions become very strategic for our countries, I guess the national law that has been put by our governments are really support or facilitate the foreign investors to really invest in this kind of project. I think that's my response to the questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Completely agree with everything that has been said so far. Maybe to just fill in a little bit more on the questions that were addressed to me. I agree with Jessica on the question of the interest of people from the United States in engaging outside of the United States. I think part of our capitalist imperialist history has made us believe that we are self-sufficient and don't need anyone, and we are very insular in the United States. But I think there are also there are opportunities, and there's a little bit of change in some places. So just to highlight, I think there's some good coordination between communities impacted by mining in the US and in other places on a company specific basis. So for example, I went a couple weeks ago or last month to Serbia with representatives of indigenous and impacted communities from the state of Minnesota to learn about the experience of Serbian communities impacted by the same mining company called Rio Tinto. It's a British Australian company. And there's been good coordination around this company between Australia, the UK, Minnesota and Arizona in the United States, Madagascar, and I believe maybe Chile. But so there's been interesting international solidarity on a company to company basis. We've seen that also with Barrick Gold, which is a big Canadian mining company, and US communities have engaged in solidarity with other communities across the globe impacted by Barrick. So I think that on that level, there's really interesting things happening. And then also, like Jessica mentioned, indigenous peoples are starting to create global movements around mining for the energy transition. And one of those is called Securing Indigenous Peoples' Rights in the Green Economy, SURGE, which includes indigenous leaders, communities, and organizations from the US and other countries that are impacted by energy transition mining. So I think there's some interesting work that's been happening for a while. There's new work that's starting to happen. Is it enough? No. Do we need to do more? Yes. But I think there's some movement there. I also want to say one of the big pieces of work that Earthworks does is reaching out to environmental organizations in the US to educate them around the risks posed by mining. There are a lot of environmental organizations in the US that are very focused on climate change and think that we just need to move to EVs at any cost. We need to move away from fossil fuels at any cost, and aren't really thinking about what the implications of the transition will mean. So a lot of the work that Earthworks does is actually reaching out to our allies and our partners and the people that we know in the environmental movement to educate them and try to get them involved in the work that we all are doing in this group around assessing and mitigating the impacts of mining in the energy transition. So I think that's another component, because I think a lot of those organizations are US organizations. So we're trying to do that work in our country to get them on board. On the criminalization and violence piece, I just want to highlight one thing that's very common in the United States, as in other countries that I'm sure you all have seen, and that's the use of lawsuits to intimidate environmental defenders. In English, the acronym that we use is a SLAP suit. So when mining companies specifically will sue local activists on basically trumped up or fake charges to try and intimidate them. So we do see that a lot in the United States as well. And then just recognizing the our colleagues' intervention about capitalism and how mining is so closely tied to capitalism. I think that's a really important point that you raised, and thank you. I also think that the solutions for, I mean, obviously, the solutions for addressing this issue are anti-capitalist solutions, right? So community-centered solutions, community-empowered solutions, degrowth, looking to move away from extraction. That's not those won't be the solution. So just elevating that and thanking you for that comment. And then lastly, the mic cut out a little bit on the last question about tailings and access to information, transparency. But I think what the person asking the question or comment was saying was that in Turkey, those in your country, there aren't provisions in place for communities to access information, access technical experts. That's not in place anywhere, really. Like, access to information is poor across the board. It's bad in the United States, it's bad in Canada, it's bad in Brazil, it's bad in the Dominican Republic, it's bad in South Africa. Every single community that I work with is facing the same challenges of not knowing what's happening, not having the information that they need to make informed decisions. And then when they try to get that information, the mining companies and or the governments block that at every turn. So I think I empathize with you in Turkey. The reason that we developed this report that I showed called Safety First with those guidelines is to try to push back in very specific places to show where we need improvement. Those guidelines are based on best practice in laws compiled from around the globe, but there's no country in the world that has implemented all of those 17 guidelines. We want them to be implemented in the United States. We're working with communities in Brazil and South Africa that are pushing their governments to implement them, but really it's not being done well anywhere. And where there are some good laws on the books in certain countries, like we just heard, they're not enforced. So there's a need for better regulation, and then there's a need for governments to actually enforce their regulation. Okay, I think I will stop there, but thank you again for the questions.
Evet, bu oturumumuzun sonuna geldik. Uluslararası konuşmacılarımız sevgili Jessica, Rachmi ve Can'a çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Bundan sonra da sık sık görüşeceğiz demektir. Bir arada olmaya başladık. Sizlere de mücadelenizde başarılar diliyoruz. Hem yaşanan sıkıntıların hem gördüğümüz işte ekosistemin gördüğü zararların hem yerel toplulukların hem işte kırsalın gördüğü zararları, yaşadığı zararları benzer olduğunu gördük. Savunuculara uygulanan baskıların aynı olduğunu yine gördük. Ve hayır deme hakkımızın olduğunu, savunmamız gerektiğini yine burada birlikte konuşmuş olduk. Sizlere çok teşekkür ediyorum.